How do grandmasters learn and memorize a ton of different openings? In fact, lots of you guys have wrote me in comments that all the openings that I share on this channel are great, but the only problem is if you forget them right after watching the video, so let's fix this together. Now, for this purpose, let's dive into a very complex and interesting variation of the Scandinavian defense, which is the good opening for you to know and to play, but even more so, I picked this opening because it is complex, tactically heavy, and if you can learn this line, then anything else will be a piece of cake. Alright, so for now, Black starts off with the Scandinavian defense, attacks the pawn, and White captures it. Now, coming back to the subject, how do you actually learn the opening so that you really get this information? In fact, there are 4 specific questions that you need to answer in order to really digest this information. My coach has taught me this like 20 years ago, and I've been using this ever since. But before we move into this, let me start with like a more basic thing. There's a famous motivational speaker, Simon Sinek, and he's got a popular speech called Start with Why. So we're gonna apply these to chess, right? Like, why do you even play chess? All right, I'm kidding. We're not gonna dive that deeply. It's not a session of psychotherapy. So we're gonna understand the reason of every move that you play, and having this information, it'll be way easier for you to learn moves because they'll come as natural and you'll naturally play them. For example, I recommend that you play here knight f6. Why this move? Why don't you just recapture the pawn? Well, because generally it is not advisable to expose your queen too early in the game because that gives your opponent extra tempos for his own development. And that is why we did not play this. Instead, we want to play knight f6 and then grab this pawn with a knight because centralizing a minor piece is a great thing to do. So we play knight f6. Now, in this position, there is one funny problem with this gambit. It works the best against intermediate to advanced level players, and it does not really work against beginners just because they don't play correct moves, right, to begin with. Now, if you look at the Masters database on Lichess, you'll see that the most played move by far here is d4, and Stockfish confirms that this move is the best for white. However, again, if you're like rated around 1000, you'll probably never see this move coming because your opponents will play an inferior move, knight to c3. Now, this move doesn't make too much sense because it does not really defend this pawn. You attack it twice, so you can just grab it. The knight is defended by the queen. Moreover, after that, they usually follow up with one more mistake. They trade on d5, helping you to activate your queen. Now they have no knight on b1, so they can't jump to c3 and attack your queen anymore, and your queen stands comfortably here. And if you look at the overall situation, the position is more or less symmetric, and you have one piece developed, they have nothing. So this is totally not dangerous for you. In fact, now it's kind of white is fighting for equality. So that's pretty good for you, and definitely no worries if your opponent goes this way. All in all, don't hesitate to challenge stronger opponents. They know the correct move and they will play pawn to d4. Now, in this position, I recommend that you go for bishop g4 hitting the queen. And once again, why do we play this move? Why don't we just grab back the pawn on d5? Well, there's a general idea about chess that attacking moves are usually the best, because they help you to activate your own piece, such as a bishop in this case, plus they interferes with your opponent's plans. Your opponent cannot do what he wants to do, he has to counter your threat. Therefore, the general rule says that if you can attack, it's usually the best thing to do. And with this logic, we just go bishop g4. We can get this pawn back quite often just later on the next move. Now, after bishop g4, the most ambitious move for white to play is going pawn f3, which will counterattack your bishop. Of course, white could play a more defensive move just to cover their queen with, let's say, a knight from f3, but it's a defensive move that does not create problems for you. After that, they have to suffer this pin, and moreover, you can even recapture on d5 with a queen, putting more pressure onto this pinned knight, and you know, life's good. You're gonna go knight c6, castle queenside, and you already put pressure, white has to defend. Therefore, here you've got no problems. Now let's come back to a more challenging variation, where instead of this, white plays an ambitious move pawn to f3, and that's the main line of the so-called Portuguese gambit. Now, why is it called a Portuguese gambit? Because it works the best with a glass of port wine. Now, after pawn f3, you gotta drop your bishop back and you play bishop f5. Now, why this move? We're always trying to understand the logic of the move so that you don't have to mechanically memorize them, you can understand why they're good. Now, because bishop loves open diagonals where they can operate and attack your opponent. They do not like pawn chains, because if we retreated our bishop this way, then this pawn chain blocks our bishop. It can't move forward, it can't attack anything, and we don't want our bishop to get stuck there. That's why we play bishop f5. Now, on the next move, we're ready to get back our pawn on d5. And if we can do so successfully, our position will be just great. We are ahead in development. Opponent has weakened his position a little bit. And therefore, if we can just get our pawn back, we'll have all the advantages with no downsides. For that reason, the only move that really is problematic for you is the pawn c4. I mean, Stockfish recommends g4, but very few of your opponents will play this, and it's risky for white as well. So c4 is a more human move for white to play, just saying, you know what, I'm holding on to this extra pawn, you ain't gonna get it back. And now the situation becomes more critical for you, because white indeed has an extra pawn on d5, they have rock solid center, and if they only have a few more moves to consolidate, let's say play knight c3, bishop d3, something like this, they'll have a totally winning position. Again, they have an extra pawn, strong center, more space, and all the advantages that they want. Therefore, after they play c4, we gotta comprehend that we're in fact playing a gambit, because we're down a pawn. And how do you play gambits? Generally speaking, not only this one, but any other gambit as well. Well, you develop quickly, even if it means sacrificing a little bit of material, then you break open the center, and you attack his king. That's how you play any gambit, basically. Think about King's Gambit or anything else. It's all the same. And now, understanding this, we know our plan. We want to develop quickly, break open the center, attack his king, right? And so we go pawn e6, which opens up this bishop because we want to develop quickly, and it also breaks open the center because we want to get to his king. Now, white usually captures here, because if not, you're going to take yourself, and then we play another fancy move. Remember, quick development, even if it means sacrificing a little bit of material. So we're not that much concerned about getting our pawn back, we just want to develop quickly and attack. And that's why we play knight to c6, which serves both of these goals. We develop a knight, and we attack this pawn on d4, forcing your opponent to defend. Now, funnily enough, in this position, the move which seems to be the most natural for white to play, pawn takes f7, turns out to be wrong. Now, why? Of course, this pawn is hanging, and it feels for white like they can open up the position around your king, and you lose the right of castle. Looks like it's just a great move for white to play. But in fact, our king is standing pretty good here. No one can really attack it, and it only helps us to complete our development, which is what we want from a gambit. We want to complete our development quickly. So your opponent, without realizing so, only helps you to realize your plan. Now, after that, we're still threatening this pawn, knight takes d4, and the most played move by white is pawn d5. Again, another natural move. And the beauty of this gambit is that all the natural moves of your opponent turn out to be wrong. And d5 is one of them. It looks like they solve the problem of defense easily by attacking your knight. But in fact, your knight is not going to go back. We're going to go forward. So this supposed attack, in fact, only helps you. Now, here's a good question to you. Would you move your knight to e5 or to b4? Think about this. Now, there is a general rule, which I call the principle of maximum activity, which says that typically you gotta choose the most forward available square because it's the most aggressive. All right, and with that in mind, you don't go knight e5, even though centralizing pieces is generally speaking a good idea, and it's also a nice principle to follow. However, a more dominant principle will be the principle of maximum activity, putting our pieces to most forward available squares. And knight b4 already creates a threat of knight to c2, forking the king and rook. In fact, there is only a handful of main principles that allow you to pick the right move in virtually any chess position. If you want to know them, it's not the subject of today's video, so you can check out the free masterclass that I have where I cover all these main principles. I'll leave a link down below in the description. White needs to stop you from playing knight to c2, forking the king and rook, therefore they go knight a3 to cover the square, and after that you keep completing your development, you play bishop c5. A really juicy square for the bishop, not only putting it to an active diagonal, but also making it impossible for him to castle because we control this square. Now, white still needs to do something. Moreover, we are now getting ready to play rook e8 and to attack the king. Remember a couple of moves ago, I've told you that an exchange on f7 was only helping black, and you can see now why. So our king is standing pretty good here, but now this square is available for our rook, which solidifies our attack. Now, they play bishop e2 here, typically trying to cover the king, but we play rook e8 anyway, putting our rook to an open file, and we're pinning the bishop, which creates a lot of threats. For example, sometimes we can jump with our knight to d3, checking the king, because the bishop is pinned by the rook. So because of this pin, the bishop cannot move. So we are threatening knight d3, checking the king, and maybe jump to f2 after that, or to any other square. It's quite annoying. Sometimes you can go bishop d3 and also try to make use of the pin that way. That's another idea. Either way, standing opposite to your rook feels uncomfortable to white, and they try to go king to f1. However, after that, you can still capitalize on the very same or very similar tactical idea. You can still make use of the pin. Now, remember, when we're playing a gambit, we want to attack quickly, right? That's one of the points of the gambit. We don't want to let your opponent to play a couple more moves, complete his development and feel good. Now, we want to attack right now when he's completely not ready to deal with our attack. And you play rook takes e2, a fancy move to speed up your attack. They have to capture with a knight. Why? Because if they capture with a queen, then bishop d3 just pins the queen and wins the game. Wins the queen and the game. Let's take it back. But of course, knight takes e2 is more natural. It also develops a piece, but you still play bishop d3. And we kind of replaced one pin along the e file with the other one along this diagonal. And the problem is white cannot move away from this pin because we also control this diagonal. So the king really has nowhere to go to. And you just want to pile up on this pin. You want to play queen e7, rook e8, and, capture this knight ultimately and win the game. As Levi Rosman elegantly suggested, PP on the PP, which is the acronym for put pressure on the pinned piece. Now, what can white do now? Well, in most cases, they go bishop d2. They see that something unpleasant is coming along the e file, so they want to start to eliminate your attack in pieces. They want to take this knight, maybe take this bishop. And indeed, you got to do something about that. And here comes the third idea of playing a gambit. Remember, we want to develop quickly, we want to open up the position and attack his king. And opening up the position and attacking the king usually involves removing some of the pawns, because if there are too many pawns in the position, they just block the position. Your pieces can't go forward freely and attack him. And there is another great looking move, knight to g4. Now, we want to open up the position around the king, so we want to eliminate this pawn from f3. And knight g4 just welcomes this pawn to move away, so that the king is deadly exposed along this file. Moreover, he can't really just tolerate this knight, because from here we can jump to f2 and attack the king or rook, or if this bishop ever moves away, we can play knight e3 with a very juicy fork to his king and queen. And white really has nothing to do. So if he takes the knight, we then take advantage of this newly opened file. We play queen f6, check to the king. Now what can they do? I mean, they have to move it really, because if they block it with the bishop, it doesn't do anything. The knight is pinned. Let's not forget that the knight cannot move, so we can just take it. And that's it. So bishop f4 does not help. And if they move the king, there are not that many squares where it can go to, because of this diagonal is controlled by us. So king f1 leads to queen f2, kind of a scholar's checkmate on f2 at the end of the day. Now, I hope that you enjoyed this variation. However, how do you make sure that you don't forget this line right after watching this video? Remember, I told you that there are 4 specific questions that you gotta answer, and doing so will help you to really solidify this knowledge, really grasp it, and keep it in your memory long term. So let's come back to the beginning of this position somewhere here. And here are the 4 questions that you need to ask yourself about this or any other opening if you really want to learn it. The first question is plans. What is your plan? What is your opponent's plan? Again, we're not machines. We're not supposed to mechanically memorize something. We need to understand the situation, and then you will memorize moves naturally. And even if you happen to forget them later on, you'll still play decent moves in style of this opening. So coming back to this position, what is your plan? We told it, right? It's the plan which is the same for any gambit. Quick development, even if it means sacrificing a little bit of material. Open up the position, open up the center, and the first thing, attack his king. Right? So that's what we want to do here. Now, what is the plan of your opponent? It's always nice to keep this in mind. So what does your opponent want? Well, your opponent doesn't really want that much. They're up material, so they just want to complete their development and enjoy their extra material. So they just want to consolidate somehow. They just want to develop. And if they can do so successfully, they'll have advantage thanks to their extra material. So that's their plan. All right. What's the second question? The second question is best positions for your pieces. In other words, how do you develop your pieces in this opening? What are the common best positions for your pieces? Now, let's talk about this one by one. Well, your knight from kingside goes to f6. That's pretty clear. The bishop, as we know, goes to g4 originally, attacks the queen. If it's pushed back, we move it back to f5 to another open diagonal. Now, your knight from b8 will surely come to c6 and will attack this pawn. How about your bishop from f8? Well, it has 2 potentially good squares, like I can continue this line a little bit to illustrate this. So it has the square b4, which is pretty cool, right? You can develop it with a tempo, and it's nice. But also you can develop it to c5, as we have seen, and control this diagonal, making it impossible for him to castle. So b4 or c5, both squares are good for your bishop. I'm not talking about playing bishop c5 right here, because you gotta address your ninth threat. Well, actually, I am talking about bishop c5 even right here, because if he takes it, there's common tactics, bishop f2, and after the king moves, we can grab the queen. Anyway, so there are two good squares for the bishop, either c5 or b4. So that's how you develop, right? Knowing this, again, makes your life easier. Even if you forget specific moves, you'll still know where to put your pieces, and that's basically the essence of playing an opening. Now, we're moving on to the next question. Let's come back to this position, beginning of the opening. The next question is favorable exchanges. Are there any exchanges which are good for you? Now, in this particular case, I don't see anything specific, so I would kind of skip this item. But in some other openings, let's say in the French defense, sometimes you've got a bad bishop and it's good for you to trade it off. And having this clear understanding that there's a certain piece that you would wish to trade off is a good thing to know long term. Now, in this position, nothing special, so definitely we're not going to take over there. Our bishop is active, the knight is passive. We're not going to allow this exchange to happen. So here, nothing special. And now we come to the fourth and the last item, which is common tactics. Again, really cool to know this because they occur across various different sub-variations of the same opening. What are common tactics here? Well, there are a number of them. I would say that after this trade, we saw the first one is that your knight can often jump to b4 and threaten this fork, knight c2, to the king and rook. So that's the first common tactics. The second one occurred a few moves later, after we pinned him along the e-file. Now the common tactics is to make use of this pin. So sometimes, I'll play some move for white just to illustrate the point. Let's say white plays whatever. Sometimes you can jump with your knight forward to d3 with this check, and because the bishop is pinned, there's nothing he can do, so the king will have to move in from here, the knight can move forward, maybe to f2, this time forking the queen and rook, so that's another common tactics to capitalize on this pin. And the other idea, which you also can sometimes use, again, making use of the same pin, is you can just try to pile up on this pinned piece. So you can play bishop d3 and try to win this bishop. Now, currently the bishop is defended by the knight, but you can trade off the defender and then play bishop d3, and now he's defenseless actually, so there is a pin. On the next move, we're going to win the bishop. So I would say that that's the second most common tactics in this variation. We're going to make use of the pin along the e-file somehow, and as we can see, there are lots of different ways of doing so. And finally, the third one, which is maybe a more specific one, but nevertheless, which we have seen down the road, is that because we want to attack the king, at some point, now bishop d2 is what they played, at some point you can consider sacrifices which open up the position, because we want to get to the king. And with that in mind, we played knight to g4. We need to open up the position so that we can get to the king, right? So this is the third most common idea. So the first one was the check on c2. The second one was capitalizing on the pin. And the third one, sacrifice something to open up the position and get to the king. So these are the things, and even if your opponent plays something unexpected, you'll still know that these are the attacking patterns that you can make use of. Hopefully now this opening will really stick into your head and you will be able to win lots of games with it. Now, as we discussed previously, stronger players will play the best move pawn d4. However, there is one more move, which is somewhat challenging, you gotta know how to counter, is the move pawn c4, where white just defends this pawn right away. And what do you do then? Well, I've got another video about that, so you can check this out right here. And after that, you can apply the same 4-step process to really grasp this new opening. Also, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to know the fundamental principles that allow you to find proper moves in any chess positions, check out this free masterclass over there.